listening to episode 250 of the Small and Supercharged podcast with Ria Freeman. So on today's podcast, I am delighted to be joined by Emma Blundell from the Mount St John's Stud all the way up in Yorkshire. And I am delighted to have Emma here because I have followed the Mount St John's story forever, actually. So it's a real joy to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for the invitation.
So Emma, can you tell us a bit about you? Because obviously we know lots about the different horses that you've produced, but can you talk to us about your journey with horses?
Yeah, I suppose it depends which part of it. I'm not from a horse family, so I was just born horse crazy, and from being a very young child was very crazy about all animals. When I was 5, I decided on my own accord, with no other member of the family, to become vegetarian. Years later, I still am. So yeah, I've always had a love for animals, but particularly horses. And by the time I was 7, I managed to finally persuade my weakening parent to let me go for a riding lesson at the local riding school. So it was a very different journey, I suppose, to probably what some riders have. But that was very much my passion and my interest, I suppose, that started it. And then that was very, much a big driving force for me, was being around the horses, caring for them, seeing the development, and always wanting to sort of progress with my riding and training from being very young. And then I was lucky that the riding school I learned to ride at also, they competed in showing classes, so they were very very high on attention to detail and presentation, as well as very strict on a lot of the basics. So I learned very good sort of ground rules, a lot of handling, care of the horse, and then started competing when I was 10. So yeah, I had a really good start from that, and that really sort of helped me be disciplined, be very caring for the horse, and that's something that I suppose stuck with me. And then I enjoyed the competitions. I was well prepared for that. I am a competitive person. I'm one of 4 siblings, so I suppose when you grow up in a big house, then there is more competition. So yeah, I would probably be the most competitive of us. Yeah, that just sort of saw me through. And then I did all of my schooling and university studies. I did business management at university, and my parents were keen for me to go and get a proper job and have the horses as a hobby, which had become a big part of my life already as a teenager. But I think by the time I was 18, 19, I really did want to do horses and try and make a way for it. So I sort of carved all of my university business assignments into being as horse related as possible. Poor lecturers of Manchester University that learnt all sorts. And was very lucky to be able to do my undergrad dissertation, which was a third of my final year, on the subject of technological developments, and I focused on the sort of development and progress in equine reproduction throughout history up to the modern possibilities that are available today, and all of the impact, because it was from a business perspective, that those technological advances could bring. So my focus in that was both on the quite well developed sort of collection, freezing, transporting of semen all over the world and trading of it, to sort of hypothesizing that the same would happen with the mares in terms of their embryos and oocytes and the mare's role, and that by having embryo transfer and ICSI and things like that, that it would facilitate mares to be able to continue in sport, because obviously it's easy to collect a stallion and then still go to a show the next day, for a mare to have an 11 and a couple of weeks pregnancy, 11 and a half months pregnancy, and continue competing and be able to wean and nurture the foal and stuff. You know, that's a very different situation before the technological possibilities of the transfers and things were sort of brought about. So that was my interest on that side, that sort of led me then, once I'd finished university, to really wanting to start my own business with that, and use those possibilities.
I was going to say, so before you, obviously you knew you wanted to do something with horses and you knew you wanted to do something on the business side, but before you did that study, did you realize the scope of what you'd be able to do from a breeding point of view?
So the what I missed there actually as well was when I finished school and before I went to uni, I did a year out travelling. And as part of that year, I worked in a very big stud in Australia that was having 150 foals a year. And whilst I worked there, my favourite horse was my first exposure to an embryo transfer offspring. And Australia was very far ahead in terms of trying things like that, along with like Argentina for the polo aspect, because the mares are so prolific in polo. But I'm not sure why it ended up in Australia being so much further on, but maybe the regulations were more relaxed from the veterinary perspective, I don't know. But the place I worked, it was a husband and wife team, Heath and Rosie Ryan, and they were both Olympic riders. And Rosie's top horse at the time, which ended up being the reserve for the London Australian Olympic team, already had a 5-year-old offspring when I was there working in the stables. And I found it just mind-blowing that there could be a Grand Prix horse that was then still aiming to be on an Olympic team after that, that wasn't an old retired mare or something that nobody had wanted to ride, that was able to contribute to having offspring at the same time as doing her training. So that was what sparked my interest in embryo transfer. And as a result of that, when I came home, the horse that I happened to have, the one horse that I had for dressage, was a mare, just by coincidence, not by anything else. And so I decided to try with her. And so that's where my sort of interest and fascination with embryo transfer and the possibilities of it came about. And I thought, well, why wouldn't you want to breed from a mare that is also going to the Olympics? And why would you have to choose between whether she breeds or whether she goes in sport? Because the stallions don't have to choose, they can do both. And as a result, the stallion market and the value of stallions as a sport horse is much higher, because they can contribute more. But actually, when you speak to the old breeders, they would say that from the very good mares, they can contribute far more as an individual for what they bring, rather than just the stallion alone. So that sort of became my interest, and something that I really wanted to sort of dive more into and learn more about. So I was just very lucky that I was able to do that as part of my business course. And so I found that fascinating, and I really thoroughly enjoyed it, and got to interview and research some really interesting aspects all around the breeding and the development.
Yes, it is really interesting, because, as you say, until Mount St John, again, I have bred a horse. It was the most terrifying experience of my life. I mean, she was fine, but gosh, when you realise that it's imminent, that it's just terrifying if you're like a hobby breeder. I don't know what it's like for you with lots of horses, but before Mount St John, it was very much, it seemed to be like the stallion was the key part of it. You know, you wanted a nice mare, but you really had to get a special stallion to make a good horse.
Yeah.
What have you learned through your work with mares about how much they have, kind of what their say is in what the offspring is like?
I mean, we've now bred with so many different mares. I've got obviously a good amount of experience from that, but it also is very individual. So you would have some mares and some stallions that are very strong in what they pass on. So this has been studied quite a lot by the main stud books. So it's something called a heritability index. So it's not only what traits or characteristics would the mother or father have, but how likely are they to pass that on to the next generation. And so there's a lot of analysis now, and it's called, like, they try and frame it into linear scoring and different sort of models within the different stud books, but it's essentially trying to fit the horse in front of you and describe it within the sort of average population. So it's not to say what's right or wrong, it's just, does this horse have a slightly longer or slightly shorter than average neck? Nobody's saying a short neck, a long neck, or whatever is optimum, or even that the average is optimum. It's just saying, what is it? And obviously over time that will change, like with a human population, you know, we're getting taller or whatever. Yeah, so it looks at every aspect, whether it's the hoof shape, the size, how upright they are, how flat-footed they are. There's so many different aspects to something like a linear scoring system. And then within, say, for example, the Oldenburgs, every new stallion that's graded and the new offspring would all have an index for how long their neck is and how likely they are to pass that on to the next generation. So that's something that's quite readily available now and come about definitely in the last 5 years as being a very strong analysis tool and tool for breeders to really look at statistically, and be able to evaluate the possible offspring. It's something that I dip in and out of. I wouldn't say I make my breeding decisions based on it, but it would definitely be something that I could refer to. And then from a mare's perspective, we can do linear scoring on the mares. We've done linear scoring on some of them, but it becomes, I suppose, the more you do it, it becomes almost a built-in autopilot system. So when I look at a horse, I would be doing that anyway, and I would then hone in on the top sort of 2 or 3 strengths and weaknesses and focus on what I wanted to improve in the mare, because from our side it's the mares that we have. And then I would look to match a stallion that not only has that trait in how I'm looking to improve it in the mare, but that he definitely has it as a strong heritability factor, because he might happen to have a long neck, but if he doesn't pass that on very consistently, then it's irrelevant how long his neck is. You could have one with a slightly shorter neck than him, that's still above average length of neck, but that passes it on much more consistently. So then you have a much better chance of getting a longer neck if that's what you desire for your foal. So that's become a much bigger part of it, but that would be something that, for me now, having seen so many and spending so much time in the market, watching so many horses and offspring and studying that sort of side, that's something that's more inbuilt, I would say, but it needs refining all the time, and that's all sort of down to how much data you put into it, to how accurate it would be. Obviously, if you just see one fabulous foal from a stallion, you can have a very skewed view of what he might produce, or it might just be from an exceptional mare. So you've got to have, you know, all of that sort of in mind, I suppose, when you're making those decisions. But yeah, some mares and some stallions can have very strong specific heritability factors, and others actually are quite inconsistent. So the stronger the heritability, the more you know what you're going to get, and the better you can match them with a stallion that would improve or help that.
No, that makes perfect sense. So you obviously went through all this work at university, studied it, and then at what point did you think, actually, I am going to make this into a business, and I am going to focus on the mare, not the stallion. I'm all about the mares.
It was actually, I was very, very lucky with that. So it was all shaped basically through my dissertation. So at the time, I was doing a bit of dressage. I was doing still some showing. I was used to sort of buying, breaking, breeding a little bit. So I was kind of doing a lot of different things and just trying to figure things out. And then through the dissertation, my supervisor for that sort of directed me towards a new pilot project that was happening at Manchester University in the business school, and they had been selected as one of, I think it was 4 or 5 unis across the UK that were going to run a new possible master's program that was on entrepreneurship. And my supervisor said, look, you know, you've clearly enjoyed this research project. And I really think that you could make a business from your interests. But I think, maybe you could go forward onto this program, and I would like to put you forward for a full scholarship if you would accept that. And so he helped me do the application for that, because I thought at this point I just wanted to go back home and ride. I'd done my 3 years at uni and what my parents wanted me to do, and I was quite happy that I'd fought my bit. But then I thought, well, if I'm being offered something like that, that's a great opportunity. I really don't. I do like to sort of be quite positive about possibilities and opportunities. So I thought, well, yeah, I should do it. Really, it's for free. It's a great program. It should be expensive to do, and it could help a lot. So it was through that that you had to go forward with a basic business concept, and mine was, God knows what I wrote for the first bit. It was something to do with horses anyway, but I was doing so many different bits. And then through that year's master's program, I basically created the business. So that's what it was for. It was for people to actually create and found their own business. So we had everything from business planning to designing a brand to budgeting to planning the whole financial start or exit, to putting strap lines and everything, every aspect of it. And so I was very lucky, but through that, it was obviously not horse people whatsoever. So I was surrounded by other very interesting people that were starting computer games and all sorts of things, fashion brands. And we had to pitch regularly. We had to present to the group and to external people, and be very serious. And quite early on, part of the training was what is your brand and what does it stand for? And at that point, I realised I had a gelding, I had a couple of other riding horses, I had a couple of show hunters. It was just a mishmash, and so there was nothing really clear of what the business could be. And then I really thought, well, I've used this research of the last year for my undergrad. I've learned all about these possibilities. I do have a mare that I'm trying to do embryo transfer with. So why don't I look at the possibility of creating something that's very specific and niche on that, because I couldn't see anybody else in the market doing it. And there was a big gap between the sports stables, the breeders that have the mares, and that would be traditionally older people and not so many young people coming into it. And then the stallion stations, which were sometimes younger people, sometimes more established places, sometimes more state-owned in places like Germany. So I just saw an opportunity to focus on mares that could do well in sport, and then try and do the embryo from them, with the sort of plan that ultimately I wanted people to say, I want to foal from that mare, regardless of what stallion it's by, rather than I just want to foal by, I don't know, Totalus or whoever. And so then if you get the combination with a very exciting stallion and an exciting mare, then it's a really good opportunity. So that's how it came about, and it was just very well shaped, I suppose, during that whole year's masters. While you've got totally non-horsey people constantly asking, well, why is that? And I was always quite good at asking why for everything, but I think when you have to justify it to somebody that really doesn't care about the individual horse or whatever, you have to be much stricter and clearer. So it was essentially through that master's program that I shaped everything and realised I needed to have a niche, something that I stood for, and a very clear brand.
No, definitely. So how did the Mount St. John brand specifically come about? Because obviously you could have been called anything in the world, couldn't you?
Yeah, well, that was the thing. At the time, I did want to leave it a little bit open, because I didn't want to pigeonhole myself to only ever doing dressage if that was not where I ended up. But Mount St. John is the name of the farm. It's where my parents live. I think it's very different. It's very unusual. We call it MSJ anyway, because obviously that's easier to shorten it. So I knew it had a great, sort of abbreviation or prefix that I could use on the horses. And I just thought it is so different. I knew it would stand out. And it's quite easy to say whatever language. And I think it almost is a curious name, because so many sort of horse things are about, a certain stud or something else. And I like it. and it just worked. And from the start, you know, we never had any challenge or pushback or any difficulties, I wouldn't say, with the name. So I think that worked really well, actually, and I was pleased with that, and that all of the branding, logo and everything I created at that time.
No, definitely, it's a brilliant name, and it's got a kind of prestigious feel about it, which is obviously what you want with these elite mares, that you want it to have that vibe as well.
Yeah.
So obviously, you know, you said your parents have got a farm and you had horses already, so you kind of had, I guess, almost the foundation to start. But so you started with your own mare and embryo transfer. How did it grow from that point, from that one mare?
Literally through the business planning that I did to figure out the scales and the economies needed to make it commercial. I interviewed people, asked what sort of volume was needed to make a proper sort of commercial enterprise from breeding. And I was advised around 20, 25 foals a year would be needed to be serious and competitive in the market. Today I have double that, but maybe that's too much. But again, it's all sort of tweaking things all the time, and you don't know what's too much until it's too much. And then, you know, the market today is different to the market 4 or 5 years ago. So it's all relevant to the moment in time. But obviously, once we press the go button, we still have to wait 11 and a half months until the foal's born, and then a few more months until the foal's weaned. So it's a very long process. And you know, when the market's changed, like last year with the situation that was going on globally, we're still in production. You know, from a business perspective, we can't press the off switch or pause. So yeah, it is bigger now than it was originally, clearly. But yeah, I very quickly realised from the interviews and from the financial planning that it needed to be of a certain scale, and then had to figure out how to achieve that and create that. So yeah, that was my initial thing. And then to do that, I actually went out and bought elderly mares that were in their late teens, so they were less expensive, but from special bloodlines, knowing that the technology available allowed me to probably have foals later in their life than they would have done just by standard breeding or even just AI. And then I bought foals with good breeding, with the plan that they could go into sport and later transfer or during the sport career, with the plan that the elderly mares would be retired by the time the foals were ready to take over. So of that, Freestyle was the first foal that I bought, so that obviously went fairly well.
Went quite well.
Yeah, and I bought her when I was in my first year actually of uni, so that was actually before the business started, because I happened to have had one foal that year that was a filly, so there was no reason really for buying her as a mare, other than the fact that we had a filly at home, so it needed another filly to be growing up with it. And then just by luck, the mare that we started the breeding with and did the first few embryos whilst I was a student, that was my riding horse, she only gave us fillies for the first 7 years. So that also did definitely shape what my business planning ended up being, because we had fields of fillies then growing up whilst I was studying, knowing that by the time I'd finished, the first one would be 4. And that was Freestyle. Freestyle and her friend. So yeah, it worked on that side, and I always wanted to have at least 2 or 3 so that they were never alone. They could grow up in a small group and benefit from the social interactions of that whilst I was studying. So yeah, that part was always already happening, but probably also determined by the first mare that we bred from that did produce a lot of fillies.
Good on her.
Yeah.
I think as well, it's interesting because you said obviously you find the stallion, you find the mare, you create magic, 11 and a half months and another few months. But actually, before you know if the horse has got real potential to excel in any sport, it's even longer than that, isn't it? So you kind of see the hallmarks of it. You see the sort of DNA is coming through and they move beautifully, but then it's even longer than that to see if it's going to really go the distance. It's a really long cycle.
It is a very long cycle, yeah.
But I mean, let's talk about Freestyle, because crikey, if there's been a mare that's put her stamp all over the dressage space, and one that, I mean, she's just magical to watch. So it's quite funny, really, that it seems that you not quite bought her by accident, but you bought her because of a situation that your mare had created.
Yeah, no, she was brought to be the friend of the one that we'd already bred. And to be honest, that was what made it even more, because the one that we bred was the first proper dressage one. We'd bred a couple of ponies from the ones we'd had as children and stuff, but they're quite different. But this was the first like horse that we'd had. And to be honest, she was actually a little terror, and she was very spoiled, very undisciplined, because we hadn't known exactly how to handle her from the start, and she'd been too, you know, spoilt and well treated in the sort of treats department. So she was actually quite a little madam. And so I knew I wanted to get another foal that was actually really easy. That was one of my main criteria. And I'd researched already about the bloodlines, and I'd heard that Donegal was very good to ride, very easy to do everything with. But they'd also been very successful, and lots of horses going, you know, to Olympic level and things that had Donegal in the line. So I was specifically looking for something that had Donegal. And I went to an auction in Germany that had 500 foals in over 2 days. And I'd earmarked about 10 foals in the catalogue, because obviously you've no idea how much they're going to go for. And I bid on a couple that just went too expensive. And she was about midway through and on the first day. And then we managed to get her. And to be honest, the main focus was she stayed right by her mother. She didn't spook at a single flower pot. She was well behaved. You know, the breeder could come in with her on the head collar and then let her go. She wasn't running around wild or difficult to catch. And I thought that's what I need. I know then I'm going to be able to handle it as a yearling, and it's probably going to help me tame my one that's been now too spoilt and got away with murder. And then as a combination we can probably cope, but if we get another little terror, we're going to really struggle. So it really was how well behaved she was, as well as having the Donegal. And she was just very correct in her movement. You know, she wasn't by any means the flashiest there, and she's not that she can't move, but there was nothing spectacular. It was just all very correct. So it was more sort of all round, looking for an all round 7 of everything, as opposed to looking for anything with 10.
Gosh, I mean, that's worked out well. That worked out very well. So obviously you had her. I appreciate you kind of got her for lots of different reasons, but was it for, I mean, it sounds like it wasn't for this superstar potential. It was for having a really nice, well put together, correct horse. But
for myself to ride.
For you to ride, because you thought actually she seems like a nice person. She's got nice bloodlines, but you didn't expect her to do what she's achieved, what she has done.
Oh no. So the plan was for her to be my own riding horse, and I was riding and I was competing, and I was at that point then I was doing the under 21s and selected for some internationals, but my horse had then had an injury, so I didn't get to do any of the team stuff at that stage. But I was very keen to have those possibilities, I suppose. And so I wanted quality, but I mean, I wasn't trying to go to the Olympics or anything. And I just wanted to be competitive and serious about it. Then I started, she grew up with us from being weaned when she left Germany, with the friend that we'd bred in the field. And then she was started at ours with a girl that worked with us at the time that was from an eventing background. And then I competed her as a 4-year-old, which is what I was used to doing with all of the show horses. And we just did a handful of shows, and she was very successful very quickly. I'd never really done the dressage, or certainly not the young horse side of it, before. So I didn't really know how that would go. But yeah, she was pretty unbeaten with that, and then got placed in the top few at the Nationals when I'd never been there before. And then sort of as a 5-year-old, I knew that she'd obviously done well at the Nationals, and that sort of the next stages were coming. And because I hadn't done so much of the training of the horse in dressage, I thought I really do need to seek a bit more help here. You know, we need to start training flying changes soon, and I've never taught a horse that. And you know, there's quite a few things now with like half passes and stuff, and it's one thing riding it on a more older schoolmaster or something, which is what I'd had from a under 21, but it's very different showing a horse how to do it whilst you're learning that as well. So I knew Charlotte from the showing days, so there's a year between us, but we'd competed quite a lot when we were sort of 10 to 15 together, and so I knew her, knew the family, and I actually just bumped into her at one point at Olympia, and I think it was when she'd not long been working for Carl, and then we chatted, and the plan was for her to come up and start teaching me a bit, and then she had her first international at Addington that January after I'd seen her in the December, and then she was sent off all over competing at internationals with Fernandez, which was her first Grand Prix horse. And so I missed out on the training, but then I thought, actually, maybe if she can't come up here, maybe I should actually ask her if she'll have the horse at hers, because I really do need to come up with a bit of a plan for her now. And she's the only dressage person really that I knew, and obviously she was doing okay with Fernandez. And then so she took her on, and then I said, can you have her for a month, see what you think? And she loved her.
Which is amazing. I mean, it's so when you still see her in action, and you watch, obviously you've seen her in real life in action, but watching the videos and watching, she's absolutely incredible, and it's such a lovely story that actually that she was bought as a horse for you, and you thought, no, actually she's really good. She needs to learn more before I can take over. At what point did you think she is incredibly special?
I think, she progressed very quickly, obviously, with Charlotte. She's the main thing with her, which is obviously in the bloodlines, is the trainability and the rideability. And that means that she wants to do the right thing for the rider at all times. So she really tries her best to do whatever you ask her. So I always describe her, she's the sort of horse that if you trained her to stand on a podium and balance on a ball, she'd do it if she thought that's what you wanted her to do. She just wants to please you. If you wanted to teach her to lay down and roll over, she would. Dressage is just then how she's developed and learned that that's what we want, and that has helped her body develop, both in strength, in range, and everything. But it's her attitude towards it, and towards wanting to please and do everything and genuinely enjoying it, that is what's given her those capabilities to progress so fast and to go so far, because she does really love it when she's doing the movements and performing in front of people, and she loves a crowd. She always enjoyed it more when there was people there to watch. She does have quite a big character in that way, in that she would never be nervous in front of people. She enjoys the performance, and for me that was something that I would always look for back, to be honest, really back from the showing days, because we're often at very big county shows where it is pretty intimidating for some horses. They're naturally a flight animal, and there's a hell of a lot going on at some of those big county shows, far more than at the dressage. So from quite young, I learned that I really wanted a proud horse and something that was confident in those stances. And so I probably would encourage that in any youngster. So because I'd taken her to her first shows and let her see everything, and encouraged her to sort of be aware of what was going on and enjoy the atmosphere, I think that was something that definitely stayed with her, and it is just part of her character.
No, definitely. She's amazing. Obviously, Freestyle is one of your huge success stories, but you do have a lot of other horses that are doing brilliant things as well. I mean, VIP is one who we see a lot. What are your other sort of stars at the moment?
We've had, like you said, we've had lots of stars. We've been very lucky on that. VIP's been very successful. She's another foal that I bought from good bloodlines, also with a Donegal mother. Then we had horses like Valencia. I bought her when she was a little bit older. She was already 5 or 6 when I bought her, so that was slightly different. But she's been an amazing horse for us and been very successful. She's now sold to a lovely rider who's aiming for Paris next year, so that's very exciting. And horses like Fairy Tale were amazing for us. She won the nationals not last year, the year before, into 2, and she represented WEG, Finland for WEG. When Amy was having her baby last year, she went to a friend of mine for the Finnish team, and within 3 months of being together was in the top half of WEG, which is just, I think, phenomenal. And she's also now sold to another family as a nice school mistress and to have a retirement home. Yeah, I mean, there's obviously lots of young ones coming up. Last year we had Viva Dannebrog, who won the 4-year-old championship. She's very exciting. We've got Top Secret that just did her first Grand Prix about a week ago, who's our first homebred that's done that level. She's with Alex Harrison at the moment, and yeah, that's very exciting, obviously, and she's been successful throughout her career with lots of different riders. And I think her top placing at the Nationals, which she was second as a 5-year-old, I think. So yeah, I mean, lots, but obviously, hopefully, a lot more to come as well.
I'm absolutely sure of it. So with these mares, they go off and do amazing things. At what point do you kind of move them? So I say back into breeding, because obviously with the embryo transfer system, they don't have to have a year off. So what point do you think, no, this mare has got all the right stuff, we need to be creating the next generation?
Oh, I start at 3.
Okay.
So once they're of reproductive age, which is pretty much 3 for most of them, then I would start the embryo transfer. So Viva Dannebrog, when she won the Nationals last year, already had a foal, and that was the price highlight of our auction, sold to very top 10 of the world riders sponsor. So yeah, I actually don't wait until I've seen them performing with competitive results, because I don't feel the need for that bit. That's a nice sort of icing on top, but from a breeder's perspective, if I like the horse and if I like the line, and I think it can have good foals, then I've got no reason to wait until they've got some sort of other accolade to be able to decide it.
And from a commercial point of view, that makes sense as well, because they do eat a lot, they do cost a lot to keep, and I guess you want to get that system moving. And also it means that when they do good things, you've got some horses coming through that are, that can go for quite a lot of money, which is obviously a really good commercial aspect.
Yeah, I think there's quite a few parts to that, and yeah, there's sort of the I'm an optimistic person about everything, so I always believe the best can happen. Obviously, that's not always possible, but I think it's a nice outlook to have. So I believe that I believed last year that she would win the Nationals, and I said that probably in February or March quite openly to my team and to the riders, and so that was something. But obviously then 12 months prior to that, when I was already and trying to create the embryo that she was having, I liked her, but I didn't know at that point how rideable or how trainable she was going to be for the ridden aspects of it. I know how easy the line was. Like, her mother was the one that Natasha borrowed from us when she didn't have a horse, and needed something for the Paralympics and Para Games, when she went to the WEG in 2018. So her horse was injured. Natasha Baker rang me and asked if I have had anything, and I didn't think I did. And then I rang her back and said, well, I have got a broodmare in the field that could come in, and she is very, very good to ride, and I think she could do the job. And within, again, only a few months, she was getting a silver medal at the WEG and was the top of her FEI world ranking. So I knew the mother had amazing rideability, and then the one that was our youngster was by Vitalis, who's got some super offspring and also very rideable. So there was no reason for it not to be. But obviously anything can happen. She could have an injury or accident or anything. But I knew from the bloodlines, if you're choosing between breeding from a mare like that versus somebody that's just got a broodmare that's never been ridden in its life, but happens to be a nice, pretty mare or something, I don't have a difficulty to decide whether I think I should or shouldn't breed from the youngster.
No.
And I think it's important for progress through generations. That's one of the amazing possibilities by embryo transfer, is that we can have much quicker progress through the generations by starting the breeding earlier, instead of waiting until they have finished being ridden at whatever age that happens to be, or have more than one foal in the same year. So when I do that, I would always choose different stallions, because then I can quicker learn which stallion matched better to the mare, and try different combinations and see which ones fit the best, basically.
No, again, all makes perfect sense. So obviously you've been doing this for a while now, and you've really built up every aspect of what you're doing. What would you say that the lows have been on the journey so far? Because I think every business definitely has lows, and I think it's always interesting to hear of those, because they're all quite different and quite individual to the business people that I speak to.
Yeah, I think, I mean, we've had a lot of lows. There's, I mean, obviously on a, I suppose, emotional side as well as financial. Any time that you have the death or injury of a horse, it's obviously a big hit. And unfortunately, the first year that I properly started the business, after I'd finished my masters and had decided and gone out and found these elderly mares, and started investing more in the foals that I'd been acquiring to go alongside the filly I bred each year while I was studying. The first year we had 15, so I was on the way towards scaling it. A couple were 2 or 3 embryos out of single mares, carried by surrogates, and one was an older mare, and she was the first one of the 15. And before that, we'd had like 1 or 2 foals a year whilst I was a student. And the first one of the 15 had a horrific birth, and we lost the mare and the foal, and it was very traumatic to experience, to see. The vet came, but there was nothing that could be done, and it was pretty traumatic, to be honest. And at that point, knowing that you've got 14 more to go through, I think it was hard. And again, you're back in the situation where the engine's running, you're not turning it off, and they're coming whatever. So we either had to learn and prepare better, and be even more paranoid than we were before, or not. You can just give the horses away or do something different drastically for 14 at that point. So we were very, very stressed that season, I would say. But luckily, to date, she's still the most traumatic birth we've had yet. But the reality is, and what I understand now from doing it for so many years and from speaking to the vets so much, is that unfortunately with any species, obviously birth, labour and pregnancy is one of the trickiest and most potentially risky things that they can go through. And so statistically, not by anybody's right or wrong doing, 1 in 20 deliveries will result in a very complicated outcome or death. And so when you start scaling it to the volume that we have, which is about 50 a year now, you know that 2 or 3, depending on which side of the average you are going to be very complicated or not survive. And I think when you process it in that way, then it is acceptable. And then you realize it's not personal, it's not lack of care or lack of attention, it is just statistics. And once I was able to process that made a big difference. It was very traumatic before, when we had any complications. So that definitely was one of the worst lows, and it was a very stressful time. I think then any time, like I said, any horse that has an accident or a serious injury, that's obviously very sad. I think when Freestyle couldn't go to Tokyo, that was clearly a very hard time for how that was. That was always obviously a huge dream for her to be going in as the favourite, and then such a short time before not able to go. That's a very big high to a very big low that you have to deal with, and it's not an easy way to take it. And I think in between, there's going to be little highs and lows all the time, but whether it's staffing things or just life situations that come up because everybody has stuff going on all the time, There's always going to be bits when you work with some of the wrong people. I've worked with great people, I've worked with some not so great people, but I think my sort of perspective on everything is just it's all a learning curve. And I think as long as we learn from the mistakes and don't try and repeat the same thing, then it's fine. You know, we can't look backwards, we can't punish ourselves for doing something by being naive or too trusting on somebody. And I've definitely been both before. You can just learn from it and then sort of try and seek the best advice and go forward. But obviously anybody that you ask for advice or that gives you advice when you're younger, you expect that to be gospel and that it's the right advice. But now obviously I've got more experience, I've learned that you can listen to everybody's advice, but you don't have to necessarily agree or take it all on board as exactly applying to your situation. And so I can filter that a lot better than I could when I was younger, and I can have the confidence to believe in my own gut instinct and knowledge now by doing it wrong before.
Yeah, I think everyone does that. And I do think the way you've kind of reframed those things that don't go well into learning opportunities is the only way to really grow. And it also does make those lows a little bit easier if you learn from it, even though they're still awful. Yeah. It's definitely a
I think
process.
my thing is just never to repeat the same mistake twice. I think it's stupid if you do that. But there can be variations on the same mistake, I suppose, under different circumstances. But yeah, you do need to start learning quite quickly where you've gone wrong and why, rather than just saying, "Oh, poor me, it was really sad." No, what could you do differently? And that's what I'm very lucky. I've got a very, very good team around of experts, whether it's the vets or farriers or whoever, and they are really, I think, world leading and very, very good at discussion and analysis. So anything that doesn't go quite right, they know that the first thing I'm going to say was, okay, that's happened, but why did it happen and how can we stop that ever happening again? And so, for example, one of the big challenges that we've got at the moment, which actually was a huge trauma last year, was the sycamore situation. And so last year was a very extreme year from a lot of environmental reasons. So it was what biologically is called a mast year. And so a lot of fruit trees overproduced due to the climate and the specific circumstances of the year. And so we had a huge windfall of sycamore. We've got a lot of sycamore across the whole place at Mount St John. And the weather was amazing last autumn. That meant that on the animal welfare perspective, we were happy to let the horses be out for longer in the fields that they may sometimes have been in the previous seasons, because we barn them all in the winter. And we were able to leave them out because we had plenty of grass growth. It was mild, it was not too wet. So that was great. But then in the space of 5 days, I had 3 dead horses from sycamore poisoning. And that was really traumatic. And there was very little we could do at that point. They were going to the clinic, rapid onset symptoms. And even the horses that had come in were still at high risk of still digesting stuff that they'd eaten for days after they were in the barns. So that was really traumatic time. And then this spring now, only a couple of weeks ago, as soon as everything sort of started to green up, then we quickly saw a sort of absolute inundation of sycamore saplings. So it looks like we have sown the fields with sycamore across some of the parts of the place. And so we've now had for the last 3 weeks a massive program of trying to kill and eradicate all of those seedlings, of which there is billions. So it's not some job of hand picking them or anything. It's on an industrial scale of cutting them back, spraying them, collecting them up. So that's been a mass operation and removed most of our spring grass from some of the fields, which isn't the ideal start to the season, but it's something that we needed to do. We couldn't, and obviously regardless of what the weather does this winter, when those seeds start dropping. And I was just trying to do what I thought was the right thing and kind for the horses, to let them just be out and enjoying the sunshine for longer, but obviously that was to the detriment. So it's just a learning curve, and it might be that that's the only time it ever does that. we've lived where we are for 22 years and it's never been a situation before. We've never had anything like what it looks like in the fields now in the spring. We've got the same trees there. There's no new ones planted. But it's just one of those perfect storm situations. But yeah, we've got to learn from it, but it doesn't make it any less traumatic or stressful at the time.
Absolutely. I mean, that sounds truly horrific. And as you say, the perfect storm sounds like the absolutely correct description, because in any other time, the horses would have benefited from that in big ways. It would have helped from a business point of view. They would have got more kind of fresh grass, less feeding. Absolute nightmare. But now kind of looking at the highs, obviously you've mentioned a few highs that you've had along your journey so far, but are there any other ones? Well, tell me about the highs you've had on kind of the whole, from the creation of Mount St. John up to sort of now.
Yeah, obviously we've been lucky. We have had some amazing highs. I think every time a healthy foal's born is a high for me, to be honest, because when you've experienced ones that aren't and less successful births, then you do really appreciate more when you get the foal delivered, born and healthy. So yeah, that's always a high, which is great. It means this time of year is lovely when it's going well, which is 99% of the time, luckily. And then I think obviously memorable times are like when Freestyle got the bronze medal at WEG when she was only 9. That was pretty special. Winning the national the first couple of times when she stepped up and did like the advanced medium and the 6-year-olds with Charlotte, and then went on to do all the small tour stuff that she was, I think, unbeaten in. And then even things like we had one year where we were first, second, and third in the 5-year-olds at the nationals, with myself, Lucinda, and Charlotte riding. That was pretty special. And I think last week when our first homebred did a 73.6% debut Grand Prix, that's pretty exciting. We had a couple of licensed stallions. I think there's been 4 or 5 now, all in the Oldenburg and Hanoverian stud books and the KWN actually. So far, I think when we sell a horse that goes on and does well with the new rider and owners, we've got one that just won its regional mare test in Holland for her division that we sold as a youngster. We had one that was placed in the top few at the Bundes Championship for her new owners, competing abroad. We had one that was the highest placed 5-year-old in all of America last year that was out of VIP. I think all of these ones are so rewarding, and it's a massive high when they have success like that. And so I do enjoy those wins, and I think when you've had the lows and you have obviously the hard work and the normal days in between, then it is important to enjoy those highs, because if you don't, you probably shouldn't be doing it, because it wouldn't balance out enough if you didn't. But yeah, no, I am very lucky that we've had lots of highs, and I think whenever you start to have a lull and it's a difficult time, luckily, hopefully you don't have to wait too long until something picks it back up. Goes over time, the balance is going in the wrong direction, and when you have too many negatives, it's hard to be positive. But as a general outlook, I am optimistic. I know that, and so I do believe that it will always come back round. And obviously, you have to learn from the mistakes and the things that could be better. But yeah, I do think when you action that and stay motivated and stay on track and keep working hard, that then normally you do get back round to getting some luck again.
Completely agree. Now, as we're coming towards the end of the podcast, before I ask you all the places where we can find you online, I wondered if you had any kind of tips or any lessons that you've learned for people who are thinking about starting an equine business or an equestrian business. Because again, I think when we are young people and we are excited about horses and we say to our parents we want to do something with horses, I saw it with my own parents. They're all the kind of colour drained out of their faces. And it's really difficult to say, no, there's loads of really good opportunities within horses. But what tips would you give somebody who's maybe thinking about doing something on a big scale like you have, basically you've changed an industry, you've broken the mold? What advice would you give them?
I think it's important to do your, I call it work experience, whatever it needs to be. and really figure out spending time with somebody that has spent time in the industry, to learn as much as you can from them. I was always described as a sponge, and I love learning and asking why. And so for anybody that's patient enough to tolerate me, I try and ask as many questions and learn as much as I can, as to what they've done, why they've done it, and what they've learned as they go along. So I think that's really important, to be able to learn from other people's mistakes rather than feeling so sort of blasé or confident that you just go out and make loads of mistakes on your own, and it's just an expensive and unnecessary way of starting. And I also think mentorship is key. So not only do you go and experience something with probably not just one other business that's hopefully fairly similar to what you're thinking of doing, but also to then really seek out a good mentor that you can trust, and that that you can sound things out through, because nobody is Superman and able to do everything on their own. You need to have a good team of people that you can really trust. You've got to be confident enough that when that's not going quite how it needs to be, that you can evaluate that and make changes, and do that in the right way that's positive for everybody. But yeah, I do think continuously evaluating as well. I think, like, re-look at whatever you're doing and why you're doing it, and really question on a properly honest, that you could account to anybody basis, for why everything is how it is each year.
Love that. Such good advice. It's been so good to talk to you. I'm going to go and stalk more of the horses that you've mentioned now online, obviously not in real life. But can you tell us all the places where we can find out more about Mount St John and follow you online as well?
Yeah, so I am mainly on Instagram. It's MSJ underscore Emma, I think. MSJM, I think, actually, EM. And then I also have the Mount St John Facebook page, and I have the Mount St John Equestrian website, which is about to have a big overhaul in the next month. So I'm needing to update all of that, and that's on the next to-do list. And yeah, I'd like to start maybe a YouTube channel this year, but that's work in progress. So yeah, there's lots of different aspects, but mainly I would say the most up to date would be Instagram for daily and certainly weekly stuff.
And you often have open days as well, don't you?
Yes, I'd like to make it ideally in July, because then the foals have all been born, and I think that's then the best time of year to do it. But trying to coordinate all the different riders and foals being born in time, and everybody's diaries is not always the most easy as the team's grown and developed. So that is still work in progress, but that's also on my to-do list to date, because the date that we got organised with quite a few people, then a key person can't do. So we just need to tweak that, and then we'll get that announced as soon as possible. But that will be probably in July, probably mid-July.
And that'll be announced across all your social media platforms.
Yes, and then on the website and things for tickets. Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Emma. It's been brilliant. Is there anything else you would like to add before I let you carry on and live your life?
No, I think that's fine. Thank you very much for having me.
No problem at all. Thank you very much for coming along.
No problem. Thank you.